Beamy Sandra, CEO of a tech startup I built from the ground up. Fempower Tech. Took years of hustle, but it's finally my vision brought to life. The office isn't just an office, it's a statement. Clean white walls, minimalist furniture, lots of plants. We have posters with quotes like, "A woman's place is in the C-suite." I made sure the whole atmosphere screamed progress and empowerment. This wasn't going to be another soulless tech bro dungeon. This was a space where female talent could flourish without being talked over or ignored. My mission was simple: build a company that proved women could lead, innovate, and dominate the market. And honestly, we were killing it. Landed a few big clients in the first couple of years, got some good press. The narrative was perfect. A female-led company disrupting a male-dominated industry. My team was mostly women, which was by design. My second-in-command, Alexis, was a star. She just got it. She understood the vision, the culture, everything. In meetings, she could take a half-formed idea of mine and articulate it so perfectly, making everyone feel inspired. She was all about synergy, brand identity, and empowering our team narrative. A natural leader. Of course, we had a few men on the technical team. You couldn't really avoid it at the start. The talent pool was what it was, a leftover from a bygone era of hiring. Our lead project manager was a guy named Henrik. Perfectly competent, I guess. He was one of those quiet types. Kept to himself, head down, always typing. He knew the systems inside and out, I'll give him that. But there was no passion, no fire. He never got excited in brainstorming sessions. He'd just sit there, listening, and then raise practical concerns. It always felt like he was trying to put the brakes on our big ideas. I saw him as a necessary gear in the machine, but not someone who would ever truly share our forward-thinking vision. He managed a small team of developers, which included this younger guy, Logan. Logan seemed okay. Talented coder from what I heard, but very much in Henrik's shadow. Quiet, did his work, didn't cause problems. Honestly, I didn't think about them much. They were the engine room. My job was to steer the ship, and I was steering it towards greatness. Sometime around the start of the year, we landed the biggest client of our lives, a massive contract that would put us on the map for good. This was our moment to prove we were major league. The project was a complex software suite, a total overhaul of the client's existing system. It had to be perfect. I called a company-wide meeting to announce the news. The energy in the room was electric. Everyone was cheering, celebrating. This was the validation of all our hard work. I gave a speech about breaking glass ceilings, about how this project would be a monument to what a female-led company could achieve. When it came time to assign leadership, the choice was obvious to me. This project needed a visionary at the helm, someone who understood the client's brand and our company's soul. It needed Alexis. I announced her as the project lead. The women in the room erupted in applause. Alexis was beaming. It was a perfect moment. I remember glancing over at Henrik. No reaction. Just that same neutral, unreadable expression. He didn't clap. Later that day, he requested a brief meeting with me. He came into my office, closed the door. He wasn't aggressive or anything. That wasn't his style. He just stood there and calmly stated that while he respected my decision, Alexis had no experience managing a technical project of this scale. He pointed out that the architecture was incredibly complex and required a deep understanding of the legacy code. He suggested that maybe he could co-lead with her, handling the technical implementation, while she handled the client-facing side. I listened patiently. When he was done, I smiled. I told him I appreciated his concern, but that this was a new era for Fempower Tech. We needed to move past the old ways of thinking, where only people with a specific kind of technical background were seen as leaders. This project was about vision, and Alexis had the vision. I told him his job was to support her, to provide his technical expertise so her vision could be realized. He just nodded slowly. He said, "Understood," and walked out. Looking back, I felt a surge of pride. I had handled that perfectly. I hadn't let his subtle attempt at undermining a female leader succeed. I was fostering a new type of leadership. The first month of the project was all about planning. Alexis was in her element. She created beautiful slide decks, organized ideation workshops, and filled our calendars with meetings about agile synergy and user-centric narratives. The client loved her. She was charming and spoke their language. Meanwhile, the tech team was supposed to be mapping out the core architecture. I noticed Henrik seemed stressed. In one of our weekly check-ins, Alexis mentioned that the tech team was being a little resistant. She said they were getting bogged down in minor details instead of embracing the big picture. I told her to stay strong and not let them derail her. I trusted her judgment completely. A few weeks later, the first deadline was missed. It wasn't a major one, just an internal milestone for the first module. Alexis explained it in a leadership meeting. She said the tech team had overestimated their initial velocity and were struggling to adapt to a more dynamic workflow. It sounded reasonable. Hiccups happen. I asked Henrik for his perspective. He just said, "We needed clearer technical specs. The requirements kept changing." I saw it as a classic case of deflecting blame. Instead of taking responsibility for his team's speed, he was pointing fingers at the leadership. It was a bit disappointing, a sign of that old-school toxic mindset. I backed Alexis up, of course. I told Henrik that in a fast-paced environment, adaptability is key, and that he and his team needed to be more flexible. The project moved on, but the problems didn't stop. More deadlines slipped. The client, who had been so happy at the start, was starting to sound concerned in their emails. Alexis assured me she had it under control. She said the team was just experiencing some growing pains. She started holding more meetings, daily stand-ups, afternoon check-ins, end-of-day summaries. She believed the problem was a lack of communication. The developers, especially Logan, started looking exhausted. I'd walk by their desks and see them just staring at their screens, looking drained. Henrik's corner was always dead silent, just the sound of keyboards clicking. I interpreted their silence as sullenness, a resistance to the new, more collaborative culture Alexis was trying to build. It felt like they were quietly protesting her leadership. The tension was getting thicker. One afternoon, I was walking back from the kitchen and overheard Logan talking to another developer. He sounded frustrated. He was saying something about how they'd spent all morning in a meeting discussing the emotional journey of the user when a critical database query was failing, and no one had given them the time to fix it. I stepped around the corner. I didn't say anything, just gave him a look. He immediately shut up and went back to his desk. This was bad. This was the exact kind of negativity that could poison a team. It was clear that the male developers were creating a toxic subculture of complaint within the company. They just didn't want to be led by a woman like Alexis. It was that simple. The breaking point came about 3 months into the project. We had a major demonstration for the client. We were supposed to show them the first fully functional pillar of the new software. Alexis had spent 2 weeks preparing the presentation. It was beautiful. She had graphics, mock-ups, a whole narrative built around it. The client team was on a video call, all their executives watching. Alexis started the demo. She clicked a button to execute the main function, and nothing. An error message popped up on the screen. It was just plain, ugly text. Fatal error. Null pointer exception. Alexis froze. She started clicking frantically, trying to refresh the page. The error message just stared back. The silence on the call was deafening. The client's CTO cleared his throat and asked what the problem was. Alexis started stammering. She said it must be a temporary glitch with the demo server. It was excruciating to watch. I had to step in and do damage control. I jumped on the call, apologized profusely, and promised them we'd figure it out and reschedule immediately. I managed to smooth things over, but the damage was done. We looked like amateurs. As soon as the call ended, I turned to Alexis. She looked like she was about to burst into tears. She immediately started talking, a mile a minute. She said the tech team had assured her everything was stable. She claimed they told her the module was ready for deployment. She specifically mentioned that Logan was the one who signed off on the final build. She painted a picture of her being betrayed by her own technical team, that they'd let her walk into an ambush. At that moment, all the little pieces clicked into place for me. The missed deadlines, the quiet resistance, the overheard complaints, Henrik's initial warning about her leadership. It wasn't incompetence, it was sabotage. The men on the team, led by Henrik's quiet disapproval, had decided to make her fail, and Logan was the one who pulled the trigger. I was filled with a cold, clear fury. I had given these men an opportunity to be part of something special, and this is how they repaid me. They had tried to humiliate a woman in a position of power. I wasn't going to let that stand. I told Alexis to hold her head high and that I would handle this. I called an emergency, all-hands-on-deck meeting in the main conference room. Everyone had to be there. Now. The team filed in, looking confused and nervous. Henrik and his developers stood in a small group at the back. I stood at the front of the room, with Alexis by my side. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then I began. I didn't shout. I spoke in a low, controlled voice. I talked about trust, about teamwork, about our shared mission. Then I talked about betrayal. I talked about how a toxic culture of resentment can destroy everything we've built. I described how one person's ego can jeopardize the jobs of everyone in this room. I didn't name anyone at first. I just let the tension build. I saw Logan shifting his weight, looking at the floor. He knew. Then I looked directly at him. I said that the catastrophic failure in the demo wasn't an accident. I said it was the result of gross negligence and a failure to follow protocol. I said that the build was pushed to the demo server without proper testing, and that the person responsible had signed off on it, knowing it was unstable. I made it clear this was not just a mistake, but a fundamental breach of professional conduct. Logan looked up, his face pale. He started to speak, but the requirements were changed at the last minute. I cut him off. I said, I'm not interested in excuses. I said, I'm interested in accountability. I told the entire room that this kind of behavior was a cancer, that it stemmed from an unwillingness to accept female leadership, that it was the kind of subtle, toxic masculinity that I created this company to fight against. I made it a lesson for everyone. Then I looked at Logan and said his employment with FemPower Tech was terminated, effective immediately. I told him to pack his personal belongings and that security would escort him out. The room was utterly silent. You could hear a pin drop. No one moved. Logan just stood there, completely stunned. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked over at Henrik, as if expecting him to say something. Henrik's face was like stone. He didn't move a muscle. He just stared straight ahead, not at me, not at Logan, just through me. It was the coldest look I'd ever seen. Finally, Logan just nodded, turned around, and walked towards his desk without another word. I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. I had excised the cancer. I had sent a clear message to everyone in that room. You are either with us or you are against us. I ended the meeting by saying that we would regroup, fix the issue, and come back stronger. I told them I had full faith in Alexis's leadership. As people started to file out of the room, I felt powerful. I had faced a challenge to my authority and my company's values, and I had won. I thought this was the end of the problem. I thought this was me, finally cleaning house. I had absolutely no idea that it was just the beginning. The next morning, I came into the office feeling renewed, ready for a fresh start. The first thing I saw was an envelope on my desk. It was a plain white envelope with my name neatly printed on the front. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a letter of resignation from Henrik. It was short and formal. No explanation, no emotion, just 2 weeks' notice as per his contract. I stared at it for a long time. My first feeling wasn't panic. It was anger. Pure, hot anger. This was it. The final act of his silent protest. He couldn't stand that I had gotten rid of his little protégé. He couldn't stand that a woman was firmly in charge. His ego was so fragile that instead of stepping up and helping us fix the mess his team had made, he was running away. He was abandoning the ship in the middle of a storm. It was the most cowardly, unprofessional thing I had ever seen. I thought about calling him into my office, demanding an explanation. But then I thought, no. Why should I give him the satisfaction? If he wanted to quit, fine. Good riddance. We didn't need men with fragile egos holding us back. This was just accelerating the process of purifying the company culture. We would be better off without him. We would hire a woman to replace him, a true believer. I convinced myself this was a blessing in disguise. I walked out of my office and told my assistant to accept the resignation and begin the exit process immediately. I didn't see Henrik for the rest of the day. He apparently spent the whole time at his desk, documenting his work and preparing for a handover. The atmosphere in the office was weird, tense, quiet. The other 2 male developers on Henrik's former team were practically ghosts. They didn't talk to anyone. They just typed. At the end of the day, one of them, a quiet guy who mostly did back-end work, walked up to the HR manager's desk. He handed her an envelope. Then he went back to his desk, packed up his small box of personal items, and walked out the door. He didn't even say goodbye to anyone. The HR manager came to my office, looking worried. She told me he had just quit, effective immediately. He was foregoing his notice period. Now I was starting to feel a little uneasy. This wasn't just Henrik anymore. This felt coordinated. The next day, the last remaining male developer did the exact same thing, resigned at the end of the day. No notice, just gone. Within 48 hours, my entire male technical staff, with the exception of one very junior IT support guy, had vanished. It happened so fast. No drama, no shouting matches, no angry emails, just a quiet, organized, and total exodus. It was unnerving. Alexis and I had a meeting to discuss the situation. She was trying to spin it positively. She said this was a great opportunity, a chance to rebuild the tech team from scratch, with people who were truly aligned with our values. She said we could finally create the 100% female-led development team we'd always dreamed of. I agreed with her, but my heart wasn't in it. A small, cold knot of dread was starting to form in my stomach. The project was in shambles. The client was waiting. And the people who knew how the system actually worked were all gone. The first few days were a blur of damage control. I put on a brave face. Alexis and I held a meeting with the remaining staff, who were all women now. I gave a speech about new beginnings. I called this a pivotal moment and an opportunity to redefine our culture. I framed the men's departure not as a crisis, but as the final necessary step in our evolution. Some of the women looked inspired. Others just looked nervous. We tried to dive back into the big project. Alexis, now the de facto head of technology as well as project management, tried to rally the troops. She scheduled a code review and strategy session. It was a disaster. The remaining developers were mostly front-end specialists or junior coders. They opened up the back-end architecture that Henrik had designed. It was like looking at the blueprints for a spaceship. It was elegant, complex, and utterly incomprehensible to them. Henrik had left documentation, pages and pages of it. But it was dense, technical, and assumed a level of foundational knowledge that nobody in the room possessed. One of the senior women, who was a brilliant UI designer, put it best. She said, "I can understand the words, but I have no idea what they mean in practice. This is a whole other language." Alexis tried to power through. She kept saying things like, "Let's think outside the box," and "What would a user-focused solution look like?" The developers just stared at her blankly. The problem wasn't the user. The problem was that the entire database was built on a series of interconnected services they didn't know how to maintain. The first real crisis hit about a week later. Our main legacy product, the one that paid the bills, went down. Just stopped working. Customers started calling. Emails flooded our support inbox. It was an all-hands-on-deck emergency. The developers spent hours staring at server logs, trying to figure out what went wrong. Alexis kept circling the room, asking for updates, which only made everyone more stressed. After about half a day of chaos, they found the problem. A critical service had failed to restart after a routine server update. It was something Henrik probably could have fixed in 5 minutes. It took our team 6 hours. 6 hours of downtime. We lost money, and, more importantly, we lost client trust. That was the moment the fake optimism started to die. The next couple of months were a slow-motion catastrophe. Every week there was a new fire to put out. A bug here, a server crashed there. The big project was completely abandoned. We didn't have the manpower or the expertise to even look at it. We were just trying to keep the lights on, to keep our existing products from falling apart completely. The company culture, which I had been so proud of, turned toxic in a different way. The initial sense of female solidarity evaporated under the constant stress. Team members started blaming each other for mistakes. Alexis's leadership style, which had seemed so visionary before, now just seemed hollow. She couldn't motivate people to do work they weren't qualified to do. Her solution to every problem was another meeting, another brainstorming session, which just took people away from the actual desperate work of trying to keep the system running. I started working later and later, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of panic. In my mind, I was still blaming the men who had left. This was their fault. They had built a system that was deliberately overcomplicated, a boys' club of code that only they could understand. They had left it in a fragile state on purpose. Their departure wasn't a resignation. It was an act of industrial sabotage. This was the narrative I clung to. It was the only thing that made sense. The final nail in the coffin came on a Tuesday. I remember it was raining. Our biggest client, the one from the failed project, officially terminated their contract. They had been patient, but their patience had run out. The news hit the office like a shock wave. That contract represented nearly half of our projected annual revenue. I ran the numbers that night, sitting alone in my office as the rain hammered against the window. The conclusion was unavoidable. At our current burn rate, with our current revenue, FemPower Tech would be bankrupt in 6 months, maybe less. I felt a profound, soul-crushing despair. Everything I had built was turning to dust. I finally had to admit the truth to myself. The current team, for all their talent in other areas, could not solve this problem. Alexis couldn't solve it. I couldn't solve it. We needed senior engineers, experts, people like Henrik. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I had to betray my own ideals to save my company. The next day, I met with HR and Alexis. I told them we were opening up new positions for senior software engineers. I said we needed to find the absolute best talent on the market, no matter what. I emphasized that we would pay top dollar, well above the industry average. We drafted the job descriptions. We made sure to include all the right buzzwords about our dynamic, inclusive, and forward-thinking culture. We posted the ads everywhere: LinkedIn, Glassdoor, major tech job boards. Then we waited and waited. A week went by. The applications started to trickle in. They were not good. We got recent boot camp grads. We got people with no relevant experience. We got one guy whose entire resume was managing a pizza restaurant. But we got 0 applications from senior engineers. Not one. HR was confused. She said with the salary we were offering, we should have been flooded with resumes. Another week passed. Same thing. It was bizarre. It felt like we were invisible. How could every single qualified engineer in the city be ignoring these positions? Alexis suggested our branding might be the problem. Maybe FemPower Tech was scaring men away. I refused to believe that. It was our strength, our identity. But the desperation was growing. The business was bleeding money every single day. I started to feel like I was going crazy. Was there some kind of secret blacklist? Had Henrik and the others gone to every good developer in the city and told them not to work for us? It seemed paranoid, but it was the only explanation I could think of. The moment of clarity, if you can call it that, came on a Friday night. I was the last one in the office, as usual. I was staring at the job posting on my screen, at the big fat 0 next to qualified applicants. I was completely out of ideas. And then a thought popped into my head, so simple I couldn't believe I hadn't had it before. What if the problem wasn't the job market? What if the problem was us? What were people actually saying about my company online? My hands felt cold as I opened a new browser tab. I hesitated for a second, then typed FemPower Tech Reviews into the Google search bar. The first link was to our Glassdoor page. I clicked it. The overall rating was 1.2 stars. My stomach dropped. I started to read the reviews, starting with the most recent ones. The first one was from an anonymous former employee. A textbook example of how good intentions can curdle into a toxic, discriminatory environment. The CEO promotes an ideology of female empowerment, but in practice, this means that competence, merit, and due process are thrown out the window. Men are treated with suspicion, their contributions are minimized, and they are used as convenient scapegoats for the failures of the CEO's unqualified inner circle. Avoid at all costs if you are a man who values your professional dignity. I felt a prickle of defensive anger. This was just a disgruntled employee. Sour grapes. I scrolled down to the next one. It was from Logan. He had used his full name. I was publicly fired here without any investigation or chance to defend myself. I was blamed for a project failure that was a direct result of mismanagement from the top. The CEO uses accusations of toxic masculinity as a weapon to silence technical concerns and punish anyone who questions her chosen favorites. The work environment is not just unprofessional, it's a psychological minefield. They will destroy your reputation to protect their narrative. My hands started to shake. This was a lie. He was twisting what happened. Then I saw the review from Henrik. It was long, detailed, and written in the same calm, dispassionate tone he used in person. It was the most devastating thing I had ever read. He didn't use emotional language. He just listed facts. He described the project, the assignment of an unqualified lead, the constant changing of technical requirements by management, and the disregard for his team's professional warnings. He detailed the incident with the failed demo, explaining the technical reason for the crash, a last-minute change to the database schema demanded by Alexis, which Logan was ordered to implement without time for testing. He described the meeting where Logan was fired as a modern-day show trial, designed to deflect blame. He concluded his review with a paragraph that burned itself into my brain. The leadership at this company does not value technical skill. They value ideological conformity. There is a pervasive and unstated policy that men are inherently problematic and that their success is a threat to the company's mission. Success is not measured by the quality of your work, but by your gender and your willingness to applaud the CEO's agenda. To any skilled engineer, male or female, who believes in meritocracy, this is not the place for you. Your talent will not be respected here. I leaned back in my chair, my breath caught in my chest. Beneath his review were dozens of comments. Thanks for the heads up, was considering applying. Wow, dodged a bullet. Thanks, man. Shared this with my network. Everyone needs to know. I kept scrolling. There were more reviews, all echoing the same themes. CEO thinks mansplaining is when you try to explain basic server architecture to her. If you're a woman, you get promoted. If you're a man, you get put on a performance improvement plan. The quietest, most hostile work environment I've ever been in. I was reading a detailed autopsy of my own company, written by the people I had driven out. Every single one of my assumptions was wrong. It wasn't sabotage, it was self-preservation. They hadn't quietly resisted. They had quietly endured until they couldn't anymore. Their exodus wasn't an act of cowardice. It was a vote of no confidence. They weren't a toxic element I had bravely excised. They were the load-bearing walls of the entire structure, and I had personally demolished them one by one with a sledgehammer of my own self-righteous ideology. I looked around the empty office, my perfect, progressive, female-led workspace. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a tomb. The posters on the wall seemed to be mocking me. All this time, I thought I was fighting against the system, against the patriarchy, against toxic masculinity. But the real toxicity, the real prejudice, the real irrational bias, it had been mine all along. I stared at the screen, at Henrik's calm, factual takedown of my entire world, and for the first time in a long, long time, I had no one else to blame. I had built my perfect world, and I had burned it to the ground all by myself.